What if the individual you discarded, the one you considered valueless, was actually in control of everything? Picture a man who callously ends his marriage to his wife, believing she's a monetary burden, only to learn she's the concealed successor to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. This tale goes beyond mere vengeance. It's an enthralling exploration of deception, the unspoken hardships of a woman reclaiming her strength, and the stunning revelation when a man comprehends that his biggest error wasn't merely forfeiting wealth, but ruining the sole, authentic element in his existence. Prepare yourself, as this narrative is set to reveal itself. The conclusion of their relationship wasn't marked by the arguments from weeks earlier. It was evident in the calm, systematic manner Marcus Hayes divided their joint possessions, forming two separate stacks on the scuffed wooden floor of their modest flat, his and hers. His collection expanded with cold precision. The polished hardcover volumes they'd acquired as a pair, the lone modern painting he'd demanded, the high-end coffee maker she presented him for his 30th birthday. Her assortment was modest, a set of cherished softcovers, a cracked pottery cup adorned with a drawn eagle, the worn blanket her grandmother had crafted. It mirrored their union, his drive, her emotion. "Elena, we must be realistic," Marcus stated, his tone lacking the affection that had once provided her comfort. He positioned himself with arms akimbo, examining the space like a corporate resource to be sold off. He was attractive in that crisp, fitted style that projected achievement, even though, by his standards, he hadn't fully attained it. His jaw clenched, a vein pulsing at his forehead. It was his deal-sealing expression, one she'd formerly respected but now viewed as unsettling. Elena Thompson, soon reverting to just Thompson, perched on the side of their uneven couch, her fingers interlocked so firmly her joints paled. She observed him, this man she'd adored with a subtle, intense loyalty for 7 years. She'd been his foundation, his supporter, the one who held two positions initially so he could dedicate himself to his emerging role in investments. She prepared his documents, absorbed his complaints about his bosses, and marked his minor triumphs with thoughtfully made dinners he scarcely savored, his thoughts already on the subsequent promotion. She'd trusted in the partnership he'd promised, founded on shared encouragement and aspirations for tomorrow. "Realistic," she echoed, the term bitter on her tongue. "Is that truly what this is, Marcus? A sensible choice?" He met her gaze at last, his brown eyes distant and evaluative, akin to how he assessed his investment holdings. "It is. I have aspirations, Elena. We've discussed this. I'm close to becoming a partner at the company. The individuals I must network with, the groups I need to integrate into, they demand a specific image." He waved loosely at their confined flat, noting the flaking wallpaper by the pane, the pre-owned furnishings she'd meticulously selected. "This existence, it's restraining me. We're restraining me." The word "we" was deceptive, a weak effort to dull a cut designed to end things. He intended her. She was the restraint. Her position as a curator at a neighborhood learning hub, her plain outfits from secondhand shops, her disinterest in the empty, schmoozing gatherings he pulled her to, where she'd always withdraw to his side, uneasy amid the gaze of ladies adorned in jewels and disdain. She wasn't a benefit. In his realm, that was unforgivable. "So, you're exchanging me?" she questioned, her tone quivering despite her attempts to stabilize it. "For a superior version, one with a more notable background." The jab struck true. A hint of something, remorse, maybe, or merely irritation at being so clearly perceived, flashed across his features. "Don't exaggerate. It's not that. We've simply diverged. Our focuses have altered." His focuses had altered. Hers had stayed foolishly unchanged. The ultimate disloyalty wasn't the departure itself, but the justification he offered. He didn't claim he'd lost affection. He didn't admit to another person, though she anticipated that soon. In a burst of harsh truth during their final heated dispute, he declared, I can't construct a dynasty with a woman satisfied with zero. Those words resounded in her mind now, a tormenting chant. Satisfied with zero. He perceived her serene joy, her passion for literature and stormy days, her fulfillment in aiding a youngster uncover a fresh tale as a deficiency in drive. He viewed her thriftiness not as a decision, but as a constraint. He regarded her as destitute, not only materially, but inwardly. And in his domain, that was lethal. He was clueless. He'd never inquired about her relatives. Not genuinely. She'd informed him they were distant, that they led a contrasting existence, and he'd taken it superficially, too absorbed in his own heritage and future to investigate hers. He perceived Elena Thompson, the reserved curator, and presumed that was the entirety. He never recognized Elena Vanderbilt Thompson, the only successor to the Vanderbilt Enterprises, an international powerhouse in logistics, innovation, and property worth tens of billions. He was oblivious that the woman he was rejecting for poverty could acquire his whole financial company with the earnings from her inheritance fund. She had fled that realm a decade prior, eager to forge an independent life, to be cherished for her essence, not her value. She'd sought to evade the oppressive demands and the luxurious confinement of her youth. She desired authenticity, and for a period, she believed she discovered it with Marcus. She'd been captivated by the engaging, motivated young man who appeared to truly notice her. Now she realized he'd only ever seen an echo of his own wants. And when that echo ceased to benefit him, he was shattering the reflection. "I'll have my attorney forward the documents," Marcus announced, snapping her back to the bleak now. He retrieved his custom blazer from a chair's back. "I've secured a down payment on a fresh residence downtown. Movers will collect my items tomorrow." He was already absent. His form lingered in the space, but his essence, his tomorrow, had departed ages ago. Elena rose, an odd serenity enveloping her. The sorrow remained, a fresh, open injury in her core, but underneath, another element awakened. A latent aspect of her, a fragment of the Vanderbilt tenacity she'd inherited from her imposing grandfather, stirring to life. "Okay," she declared, her tone clear and resolute, astonishing them both. "Forward the documents. Marcus, remove your belongings." He hesitated at the entrance, slightly startled by her abrupt poise. He'd anticipated more sorrow, more entreaties. He had a prepared response for that. She regarded him, truly regarded him one final time. She observed the drive that had twisted into avarice, the assurance that had soured into conceit. She saw the man she'd cherished and the unfamiliar figure he'd evolved into. And she comprehended he wasn't merely abandoning her. He was liberating her. "I hope you discover what you seek," she uttered. It wasn't a cliché. It was a condemnation. For she knew, with a certainty as unyielding and solid as a gem, that he never would. He was pursuing an ever-retreating horizon, and he'd just relinquished his soul stabilizer. He offered a brief acknowledgement, opened the portal, and exited, shutting it gently after him. The snap of the lock reverberated in the hushed flat. Elena remained solitary amid the debris of her existence. The agony was vast, a tangible burden threatening to overwhelm her. Yet as she examined her modest collection of items, the volumes brimming with alternate realms, the cup that had comforted her palms on innumerable dawns, the blanket woven with eras of affection, she didn't feel impoverished. For the first occasion in ages, she sensed the subtle, unfamiliar spark of authority. He was unaware of what he'd just unleashed. He was unaware of whom he'd just emancipated. The trip back to the Vanderbilt property was a passage through an existence she'd intentionally erased. Departing the metropolis's concrete expanse, the scenery mellowed into the refined, affluent grace of Fairfield County. The paths constricted, meandering through thick woodlands that concealed expansive domains behind sturdy rock barriers and metal entrances. It was a domain of subdued, enormous influence, a domain that had perpetually felt more like incarceration than a residence. Upon arriving at the primary entrances of Oak Ridge, the title her grandmother had bestowed on the property, Elena's grip intensified on the wheel of her unassuming decade-old vehicle. The entrances were splendid, wrought metal shaped into a complex pattern of linked eagles and platinum foliage, an emblem of the family lineage. To her, they'd always resembled prison bars. She hadn't returned in 10 years, not since the heated clash with her grandfather, Edward Vanderbilt, a figure who dominated executive suites and kin with identical unyielding determination. He had outlined a meticulously planned future for her, an orchestrated union with the offspring of a continental finance magnate to consolidate their dominions, a position on the council, a destiny carved from obligation and heritage. When she declined, insisting on her own path, he'd issued an ultimatum: the Vanderbilt title and its privileges or departure. She'd selected departure, exiting with merely a minor inheritance from her mother, resolved to demonstrate she could thrive without his opulent manipulation. A guard, unfamiliar to her, neared her car, his demeanor stoic. "May I assist you, madam?" "I'm here to meet Edward Vanderbilt," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm Elena Thompson." He consulted his roster, his forehead creasing. "That name isn't listed." "Naturally not. In her grandfather's sphere, she'd vanished." "Inform him it's his granddaughter," she appended, the term odd on her lips. The guard's gaze widened marginally. He communicated via his device, his tone a soft hum. After some anxious seconds, the grand, mute entrances parted inward. The wayward granddaughter, apparently, was permitted a meeting. The extended, curving drive was bordered by age-old maple trees, their limbs creating an arch above. The residence emerged gradually, a stately brick manor that appeared to emerge from the soil. It was stunning, commanding, and as chilly as she recalled. Parking her simple car beside a shining silver Rolls-Royce, Elena experienced a surge of former vulnerability. She wore denim and a basic top, a sharp difference from the environment she was rejoining. Inhaling deeply, she ascended the brick steps and passed through the solid maple doors, opened by a servant who seemed as timeless and inflexible as the structure. "Miss Elena," he rasped, his voice a gravelly note of astonishment. His name was Jenkins, and he'd served since her youth. A spark of kindness in his gaze was her sole greeting. "Mr. Vanderbilt is in his office." The path to the office was a spectral revisit of her history. The vast entry with its lofty vaults and a fixture cascading gems like ice droplets. The images of grave forebears along the corridors, their stares seeming to trail her with reproach. The oppressive quiet interrupted only by the chime of a heritage clock that tracked time in lineages, not moments. Edward Vanderbilt was precisely as she remembered, positioned behind a grand walnut desk, his posture rigid, his gray hair impeccably styled. He was 85, yet his eyes a keen green, were as acute and strategic as always. The office was his command center, stocked with bound tomes he'd ignored and relics from his worldwide victories. The atmosphere carried scents of aged documents, hide, and dominance. He didn't rise. He merely observed her near, his face inscrutable. He motioned to the seat across from his desk, a bid that resembled a command. "Elena," he intoned, his voice a deep growl. "What prompts this unforeseen visit?" A gulf of a decade separated them, brimming with unvoiced blames and injured egos. She hadn't arrived for a joyful gathering. She'd come because she lacked alternatives. Marcus had demolished her meticulously built existence, and this was her remaining option. "Hello, grandfather," she responded, her tone firm. She refused to display the turmoil within. I had to return. Had to." He sneered, a faint, harsh grin on his mouth. "Don't claim the ordinary world overwhelmed you at last. I think I cautioned you. You squandered an inheritance for an illusion, for some childish idea of ordinariness. His statements were blades targeting her newest scars. The illusion he referenced was the existence she'd attempted with Marcus, now reduced to ashes. "My existence is my affair," she asserted, raising her head. "I'm not here to express regret." "Then why?" he urged, inclining ahead. "Don't squander my moments with emotion, child. You were never adept at it. You are a Vanderbilt. We are deal-oriented folk. What do you seek?" The stark, merciless candor was nearly comforting. This, she grasped. This was the dialect of her rearing. "I want what's mine," she proclaimed, the words startling her with their intensity. They stemmed from that freshly roused segment of her, weary of being minor, of being undervalued. Edward reclined, a real glint of curiosity in his gaze. He tinted his digits, appraising her like a fresh asset. "And what exactly do you think belongs to you?" "My position," she replied, building assurance. "My birthright. I renounced it, I realize, but I am your sole direct living offspring. I am the successor to this enterprise, to this heritage." She indicated the space. "And I intend to seize it." For an extended instant, the sole noise was the clock's rhythm. Her grandfather's visage was a veil of icy reflection. She'd expected mockery, expulsion, but he refrained. "You enter after 10 years of quiet," he articulated deliberately, "appearing as if you've rested in your vehicle, and you insist on receiving a multi-billion-dollar dominion. The boldness is striking. It's the most Vanderbilt act you've performed in 10 years. He rose and approached the broad, arched window overlooking the expansive, groomed lawns. "The realm you've occupied, the one of musty tomes and low pay, is a juvenile's arena. The realm I occupy is a war zone. The predators on my council would devour you before you located your chair. You lack expertise, preparation, no grasp of what it demands to manage this firm." "Then prepare me," she retorted, standing too. "Instruct me. You desired a marionette, and I rejected. But I'm not rejecting education. I'm not rejecting leadership. I am your lineage. I possess your intellect. You recognize it." He pivoted to confront her. An intricate blend of sentiments churned in his keen green eyes: doubt, admiration, and a profound, assessing intrigue. He discerned the fervor in her, the identical fervor he held. He discerned the anguish propelling it. And like any astute entrepreneur, he spotted a prospect. "You wish to return?" he queried, his tone lowering to a secretive murmur. "Very well, but terms apply. You will reside here, under my domain. You will commence at the base as my aide. You will master every aspect of this operation from the foundation. You will obey my directives without debate. You will demonstrate to me, and crucially to the council, that you are not the emotional runaway, but a genuine Vanderbilt, merciless and prepared to command." He was probing her, pressing her, seeking if she'd shatter. Elena recalled Marcus's scornful expression, his vicious remarks. "I can't construct a dynasty with a woman satisfied with zero." A wry grin graced her lips. "He believed I was zero," she murmured, more inwardly than to him. "Who?" her grandfather insisted. She met his gaze directly, her determination solidifying into iron. "My spouse, my impending ex-spouse." The reference to a spouse she'd concealed piqued him. He arched a gray brow. Male factors in," he pondered. "This possesses the elements of a true spectacle. Splendid. Nothing hones the intellect like sorrow and a desire for retribution." He returned to his desk and proffered a hand. It was not a salutation, but a pact. "Do we agree, Elena Vanderbilt Thompson?" Elena regarded his extended palm, the one that had once sought to dictate her fate. Now it proffered instruments to shape a fresh one. She was swapping one confinement for another, but this round she understood the guidelines. This round she would dominate them. She grasped his hand. His hold was solid, inflexible. "We agree, grandfather," she affirmed. The shift from Elena Thompson, neighborhood curator, to Elena Vanderbilt Thompson, aide to the head of Vanderbilt Enterprises, was as severe as it was rapid. Her grandfather honored his pledge. He initiated her at the absolute entry to the summit. Her routine turned into a vortex of dawn awakenings at 5, precise agenda oversight, and a ceaseless flood of data she was required to ingest through pure immersion. Her tiny flat, formerly a haven, was boxed and stored. Her fresh abode was a collection of chambers in a section of the Oakridge Manor, lavish and detached. The vintage pieces were invaluable. The artwork on the surfaces was gallery caliber, and the hush was overwhelming. It resembled less a sleeping area and more an elegantly furnished detention space. She exchanged her bargain tops for an array of perfectly fitted outfits and garments in tones of slate, indigo, and ebony, the Vanderbilt attire. The apparel felt like attire, a casing she was destined to inhabit. Her days involved shadowing Edward Vanderbilt like a silhouette. She attended sessions where vast sums were debated with the nonchalance of selecting a meal. She absorbed knowledge on debt finance purchases, aggressive acquisitions, and economic fluctuations. The figures around the conference table were predators, their grins pointed, their gazes overlooking naught. They regarded her with a blend of interest and contempt. The returned granddaughter, the untrained intruder. They murmured about her in the passages, their phrases laced with doubt. Edward offered no protection. Indeed, he appeared to relish immersing her fully. The initial fiscal details for the Tokyo Logistics purchase he'd command, hurling a bulky folder onto her workstation. Condense it. I require a single-sheet overview in 60 minutes. Emphasize the risks. The initial weeks were a torment of fatigue and uncertainty. The workload's magnitude was overwhelming. The business terminology was an alien tongue she had to acquire instantly. More than once, she stared at a data sheet at 2 in the morning, her sight hazy, the figures blurring, the acrid flavor of defeat on her palate. She recalled Marcus, the uncomplicated existence he'd so readily abandoned. There were instances of frailty where she yearned for it. The serene obscurity, the sensation of being adored, even if that adoration was false. But then Marcus's indifferent visage would appear in her thoughts. Satisfied with 0, and the Vanderbilt blaze within her would flare. She'd inhale deeply, consume another mug of dark brew, and compel the figures to align. Gradually, nearly unnoticed, dynamics altered. The cadence of the commercial sphere, once disordered, started to exhibit structure. She began identifying the titles, the entities, the complex interplay of authority and sway. She mastered interpreting the subtleties of a contract to detect the defect in a fiscal forecast. Her intellect, perpetually keen and analytical from her affection for writings and chronicles, began employing those abilities to this fresh, ruthless tale. She uncovered a talent for tactics, anticipating the broader view, a quality she surely inherited from her overseer. Her grandfather stayed a rigorous, enigmatic guide. He never commended her. He solely highlighted her errors, his evaluations as acute and exact as a doctor's blade. Your merger overview was passable, but you overlooked the regulatory effects in Section 3. A mediocre attempt, Elena. Redo it. Yet she noted minor details. He'd deposit a particular volume on her workstation, a life story of a competing leader, a chronicle of the exchange market, sans remark. In gatherings, when a condescending inquiry was aimed at her, he'd quiet, his penetrating stare challenging her to respond independently. He was evaluating her, certainly, but he was also educating her, shaping her in his own forge. One night, following a taxing 14-hour stint, she delivered his evening brandy in the office. He examined an aged image on his desk. She glimpsed it, a youthful lady with Elena's gaze and a kind, soft grin, cradling a young child. Her mother. She was too gentle for this realm. Edward murmured softly, not glancing up. Your father, he was a visionary, a creator, a decent fellow, but fragile. He couldn't safeguard her. Her parents perished in a boating mishap when she was 12. Her grandfather seldom mentioned them. "I see her in you," he proceeded, his tone rough. "That gentleness. I attempted to eradicate it from you as a youth, to fortify you. Instead, I repelled you." He finally gazed up, and for the first time, Elena saw not the leader, but an elderly man plagued by remorse. "I won't repeat that error. This realm will attempt to shatter you. It will consume your gentleness and discard it. You must be tougher than it. You must be wiser. You must be a Vanderbilt." It was the nearest he'd approached to remorse, to confessing affection. It was an exposed, vulnerable instant, and it shifted their bond. The bitterness she'd nurtured toward him for so long began to merge with a fresh, nuanced comprehension. He wasn't merely a despot. He was a man fearful of frailty, a man who viewed fortitude as the lone shield against a realm that had stolen his child from him. The mental strain was enormous. Elena sensed herself evolving. The serene, tender woman who derived pleasure from the whisper of page turns was being overlaid with a novel identity, acute, concentrated, and progressively skeptical. She was mastering division, silencing the segment of her that longed for basic bonds, and enhancing the segment that desired accomplishment, that flourished in the mental skirmish of the executive suite. The concluding fragment of her former existence was cut one afternoon when a neat folder arrived, the separation documents from Marcus's counsel. She endorsed them with a stable grip in the barren setting of the Vanderbilt Enterprises legal unit, a certifier imprinting the papers with a concluding apathetic stamp. There was no ritual, no weeping. She experienced a twinge of grief for the woman who'd once trusted in that union. But that woman seemed alien now. She inserted the endorsed papers into a dispatch envelope, directing it to Marcus's elite legal group. As she did, she halted. On impulse, she grabbed a leaf of her new, extravagantly priced custom paper, thick ivory material stamped with a subtle V, and penned a brief message. "Marcus, gratitude for the impetus. It was precisely what I required. Elena." She secured the envelope, a minor, icy grin on her countenance. It was a war declaration he wouldn't comprehend he was engaging. He believed he'd advanced, abandoning her in his pursuit of authority and riches. He was ignorant she was now operating in a wholly distinct arena on a terrain so expansive he couldn't fathom its limits. He was ascending a staircase. She was gearing up to possess the whole structure. 3 months into her renewed existence, her grandfather deemed it time for Elena's informal introduction to the elite she had escaped. The occasion was the yearly Vanderbilt Foundation banquet, a prominent benevolent event that crowned the Manhattan social schedule. It was an evening where industry giants, lawmakers, and established dynasties gathered to flaunt their affluence and clout, all veiled as generosity. For Elena, it was a baptism of fire. "You will accompany me," Edward declared one morning, as if notifying her of a routine assembly. "You will be observed, discussed, and evaluated. Your every utterance, every motion will be dissected. Do not fail me." The readiness resembled arming for conflict. A designer, a stern woman with a French inflection, was called to the manor. She arrived with arrays of couture dresses costing more than Elena's former vehicle. Elena felt like a mannequin being attired, an item being refined for exhibition. She ultimately chose a rich sapphire blue satin dress. It was refined and subtle, but its fit to her shape felt both empowering and perilously revealing. Gems loaned, she learned, from a gem merchant, as a Vanderbilt avoids personal display in public unless declaring, were fastened around her throat and arm. Her locks were arranged in a sophisticated design, and her cosmetics were impeccable. Gazing in the reflection, she scarcely identified the woman returning the stare. The tormented, devastated curator had vanished. In her stead was an unknown with distant, resolute eyes. She appeared costly. She appeared like a Vanderbilt. Reaching the banquet, hosted at the Guggenheim Museum, was an onslaught of senses. The burst of flashes, the clamor of the throng restrained by plush barriers, the torrent of illumination and sound. As she emerged from the driven vehicle and linked arms with her grandfather, a silence descended on the nearest journalists, succeeded by a frenzied volley of inquiries. "Mr. Vanderbilt, who is your escort this evening? Is this the enigmatic granddaughter?" Edward disregarded them, his countenance a facade of majestic apathy, and led Elena up the majestic steps. Within was a sparkling ocean of influence. Elena sensed countless stares upon her, their weights tangible. Murmurs trailed them as they navigated the area. She could perceive the conjecture, the assessment. She maintained her posture erect, her head elevated precisely as her grandfather had directed. She grinned when he presented her to figures whose titles equated to riches and dominance, her thoughts hastening to remember the profiles she'd examined on each. She conversed astutely about economic shifts and charitable efforts, her tone composed and deliberate. She was enacting the role, and to her astonishment, she enacted it adeptly. But the inner turmoil raged. A portion of her was repulsed by the lavish spectacle, the shallow dialogues, the astounding extravagance of it all. This was the realm she'd fled, a realm that gauged a person's value by their assets and surname. Yet another portion, the Vanderbilt side, experienced a rush. There was an indisputable vitality in the space, a flow of immense authority that was mesmerizing. She was no longer an external observer. She was in the eye of the tempest. She was conversing with a congressman when she spotted him, Marcus Hayes. He stood across the expansive, packed chamber near a wine cascade, chuckling, mingling with a cluster of men she identified as associates from a competing company. And on his arm was a brunette, flawlessly garbed woman whose kin, Elena knew from her studies, controlled a major share of urban property. He had secured his benefit. The vision of him was like a strike. The breath escaped her. For an instant, the crafted composure, the Vanderbilt shield, threatened to fracture. The sting of his treachery, which she'd so meticulously isolated, surged back vivid and unhealed. She saw the man she'd adored, the existence they'd shared, and the effortless brutality with which he'd rejected it. Her grandfather, detecting her change, traced her look. His eyes constricted. "Ah," he murmured gently, a tone of stern contentment in his words. "The spouse. So, he navigates these currents now. He's attending as a guest of Reginald Blake," Elena whispered, her mind instinctively shifting to tactical mode, pinpointing those around him. "Blake's group is attempting to negotiate an agreement with our Asian branch, and he brought his tiny minnow along to dazzle the predators," Edward concluded, a disdainful grin on his lips. Pitiful. Marcus hadn't noticed her yet. He was too immersed in his act, portraying the emerging mogul. He appeared assured, prosperous, precisely the man he'd always aspired to be. "Proceed," her grandfather commanded, his voice a subtle order in her ear. "Do not conceal. Do not flee. You are a Vanderbilt. This space is yours. He is a bug within it. Behave accordingly." His words were like a dash of frigid liquid. He was correct. Concealing would grant Marcus a win. She drew a stabilizing breath, the sapphire satin cool on her flesh. She separated from the congressman with a courteous incline and commenced walking. She didn't advance toward Marcus, but along a route that would unavoidably cross his. She proceeded with a novel elegance and intent, a specter from his history emerging in the core of his coveted future. As she neared, one man in Marcus's group observed her. His eyes expanded, and he elbowed his associate. The discussion stumbled. Marcus, sensing the atmospheric shift, rotated. His gaze locked with hers. The sleek, assured grin on his face solidified, then dissolved. His wine glass halted midway to his mouth, his complexion paling. He appeared as if confronting a phantom. He beheld Elena, his serene, bargain-clad curator wife, positioned in the lavish grandeur of the banquet, enveloped in satin and gems, appearing more authoritative and stunning than he'd ever witnessed. It was an image that defied logic. His mind faltered, striving to align the woman he'd rejected with the deity before him. Elena didn't halt her pace. She offered him a minor, distant grin, a grin that failed to warm her eyes. It was a grin of absolute, pure dominance. It conveyed, "You are oblivious." She passed him without utterance, as if he were mere decor. She could sense his astonished, fixed stare on her rear. She could sense the perplexed and fascinated gazes of his companions. She hadn't provoked a commotion. She'd achieved something far more ruinous. She'd made him irrelevant. She arrived at her grandfather's flank, her pulse racing, a blend of dread and thrilling victory pulsing through her. Edward Vanderbilt rested a hand on her limb, his grasp firm and endorsing. "Excellent," he whispered, his keen green eyes shining with admiration. "Quite excellent. The initial instruction is finished. Your supreme strength isn't your riches, Elena. It's their total, utter misjudgment of you." Elena glanced back across the space. Marcus remained immobile, his new partner regarding him with a puzzled scowl. He appeared diminutive, adrift, a man whose meticulously built reality had just been demolished by a specter in a sapphire gown. For the first time that evening, Elena's grin warmed her eyes. It wasn't a joyful grin. It was the grin of a sovereign who had just outmaneuvered a minion. The vision of Elena at the banquet tormented Marcus. It was a flaw in his world, a riddle he couldn't unravel. He relived the instant throughout the night. The sapphire gown, the improbable gems, the eerily assured grin. He attempted to operate, to persist in his mingling, but his efforts were empty. His escort, a clever property heiress named Sophia, detected his distraction promptly. "Who was that lady, Marcus?" she'd inquired in the vehicle homeward, her voice sharp. "You seemed like you'd encountered a phantom." "Nobody," he'd falsified too hastily. "Merely an acquaintance from before." But the deception was weak, and the ensuing days were agony of mental discord. He tried to justify it. Perhaps Elena had a wealthy new suitor. Maybe she was an invitee for some affluent curator patron, but none fit. The manner she conducted herself, the way the Edward Vanderbilt, had his hand on her arm, protective and possessive, it didn't add up. His fixation seeped into his profession. He was unfocused in sessions, his thoughts wandering to that instant. He committed a vital mistake in an economic projection, swapping 2 digits, an error his leaders detected, leading to severe censure. The partnership he'd neared suddenly appeared to evade him. His carefully built rise was wavering. Propelled by gnawing doubt, he did what he excelled at. He investigated. He engaged a confidential detective, a reserved man expert in monetary and history verifications for the metropolis's upper crust. "I want all details on her," Marcus directed, attempting casualness. "Elena Thompson, my former wife. I just want to confirm she's fine." The excuse was thin, but the detective, named Ramirez, merely inclined, his expression blank. He was compensated to avoid queries. While awaiting the dossier, Marcus's existence continued to subtly skew. He got official word that the completion of their separation, which ought to have been straightforward, was now managed by a new legal entity on Elena's side: Vanderbilt, Harrington, and Locke. Marcus recognized the title. It was among the mightiest business law groups globally. They didn't manage separations for curators. They oversaw multi-billion-dollar fusions and purchases. It was akin to deploying a battleship for angling. A chill fear began accumulating in his gut. The crisis peaked a week later. Ramirez contacted him. "The dossier is prepared," he stated, his tone even. "But you'll want to review this personally." They convened at a subdued lounge in Uptown. Ramirez pushed a thick dossier across the surface. Marcus opened it, his hands quivering faintly. The initial sheet was a basic life summary, Elena Thompson. But then he saw the compound name he'd ignored, Elena Vanderbilt Thompson. His eyes skimmed downward. Parents gone. Grandfather Edward Vanderbilt, head and chair of Vanderbilt Enterprises. Marcus's respiration halted. It must be an error, another Vanderbilt. But as he paged through, the proof was undeniable. Birth records, academy log from a premier Austrian academy, inheritance papers outlining a legacy so immense the figures appeared fabricated. Images of Elena as a youth on vessels and at opulent properties, positioned beside the same imposing elder from the banquet. The surroundings muted. The subdued chatter of the lounge, the tinkling of vessels, all diminished. There was solely the thunder in his ears. He perceived it all with terrifying, visceral lucidity. Her uncomplicated life wasn't a barrier. It was a selection. Her separation from her kin wasn't a trivial dispute. It was a revolt against a realm of inconceivable riches. Her bargain outfits, her pre-owned decor, her serene fulfillment. It wasn't absence of drive. It was dismissal of the elements he idolized. He hadn't merely separated from a curator. He'd separated from the exclusive successor to the Vanderbilt dominion. The expression he'd hurled at her, the harshest he'd uttered, returned with physical force. I can't construct a dynasty with a woman satisfied with zero. He'd been adjacent to a dynasty that could have been his, and he'd been totally, utterly sightless. The absolute, colossal folly of his deeds overwhelmed him. His drive, his precise computations, his societal ascent. It was all juvenile play relative to the authority she commanded, authority she'd concealed from him for 7 years. But the terror delved deeper than the lost chance. He began doubting all. Had she mocked him throughout? Was their entire union a sort of societal trial for a weary successor? The notion was venom, distorting his dignity, his identity into a tangle of excruciating shame. He had strutted and posed, bragging about his trivial achievements, his meager rewards to a woman who could purchase and dispose of him endlessly. He felt like the universe's greatest idiot. He departed the lounge dazed, staggering into the stark urban glow. He returned to his polished, vacant flat, the one he'd boasted about, and it now resembled a budget film backdrop. He examined his custom outfits, his costly timepiece, the emblems of the triumph he'd forfeited his union for, and they appeared like baubles, like wretched accessories in a catastrophe of his creation. In the following days, Marcus disintegrated. He attempted to contact her, but her prior number was inactive. He visited her learning hub, but learned she no longer served there. He was entirely barred. The entry he'd once possessed, the closeness he'd assumed, was absent. His profession deteriorated disastrously. The partnership, once assured, was formally delayed. His leaders referenced his inattention and erratic conduct. Sophia, his heiress companion, wearied of his unstable tempers and compulsive queries about the Vanderbilt kin, and terminated their bond with a distant, rejecting message. He was forfeiting all he believed he'd acquired. One evening, intoxicated and hopeless, he traveled to Fairfield County, to the listed address for the Oak Ridge property. He stationed outside the splendid metal entrances, gazing at the far lights of the manor. He witnessed a dark sedan glide through the entrances, and for a brief moment, he thought he glimpsed her outline in the rear glass. He was the outsider now, excluded, peering into a realm he'd been too sightless to perceive. He had evaluated Elena by the most superficial criteria: her earnings, her attire, her connections. He'd failed to discern her genuine value. The subtle fortitude, the concealed profundities, the fierce honesty that had prompted her to abandon a fortune seeking authenticity. He'd been presented authenticity, and he'd bartered it for a forged form of triumph. Seated in his vehicle, with the detective's dossier on the adjacent seat like a charge, Marcus Hayes finally grasped he hadn't merely erred. He'd enacted self-ruination on a grand scale. He hadn't lost a spouse. He'd lost his essence. And he knew, with a certainty that froze him deeply, that this was merely the start of his decline. While Marcus's existence imploded, Elena's expanded exponentially. The banquet had been a pivotal moment. It had compelled her to face her history and Marcus's disloyalty publicly. And rather than collapsing, she'd uncovered a well of fortitude she hadn't known existed. The distant grin she bestowed on him was more than a dominance maneuver. It was a cutting of the last sentimental link binding her to her prior existence. The anguish lingered, a muted pain in a concealed corner of her soul, but it no longer shaped her. It was now propulsion. Her grandfather, satisfied with her display, hastened her education. She received her own workspace, a side suite with sweeping urban vistas larger than her entire former flat. She was allocated a modest group of evaluators and investigators. Her designation was formally altered from aide to deputy head of tactical growth. The murmurs in the passages shifted from doubtful to apprehensive. The labor engulfed her, but in an empowering manner rather than depleting. She found a true zeal for the enterprise, not for the funds, but for the elaborate tactics, the worldwide strategy contest. She shone at spotting undervalued resources and prospective expansion areas. Her curator's intellect for inquiry and motif detection proved a powerful tool. She wasn't merely enacting a role now. She was embodying it. Yet, the more she integrated into the Vanderbilt sphere, the more she grappled with her identity. Was she forfeiting the woman who cherished calm evenings and the aroma of aged volumes? She deliberately clung to that facet. Late evenings, in her lavish suite at Oak Ridge, she'd discard her luxury footwear, nestle in a ledge by the window, and peruse not economic summaries or fiscal reports, but fictions and verses, the terms of connection to her former self. It was amid this phase that she started envisioning what would become her signature endeavor. While examining the Vanderbilt Foundation's operations, she deemed them detached and businesslike, centered on large, impersonal contributions to academies and galleries, initiatives more about fiscal advantages and publicity than true effect. It was benevolence as a transaction, and it chilled her. She recalled her times at the neighborhood learning hub, the youngsters from modest households whose sole entry to texts and devices was via those portals. She remembered the reading schemes they battled to finance, the communal bond that venue had nurtured, that was genuine, that counted. Elena devoted weeks covertly crafting a fresh plan. She utilized her inquiry group to amass information on reading levels, learning disparities, and the erosion of communal areas in underprivileged districts nationwide. She devised a thorough multi-year program, the Vanderbilt Eagle Initiative. The scheme aimed to finance and construct advanced learning hubs and communal education facilities outfitted with cutting-edge tech, career preparation tools, and creative programs right in the core of the areas needing them most. The title was a subtle reference to her beloved cracked cup, a token of her prior existence, a memento of her origins. When prepared, she sought a formal session with her grandfather, not as kin, but as a deputy head of the enterprise. She delivered her plan in the primary conference room, the identical space where she'd once sat mute, attempting to decode the business lingo. She outlined the facts, the monetary estimates, and the extended societal gains. She spoke with an enthusiasm and command that hushed the assembly. She wasn't merely offering a benevolent program. She was offering a fresh outlook for the Vanderbilt heritage, one harmonizing gain with intent. The Vanderbilt title is linked to authority, riches, sway, she wrapped up, her gaze meeting her grandfather's over the glossy surface. I think it's also linked to chance, not as charity, but as an allocation in human capability. This is how we forge a heritage that endures. Upon concluding, the space was mute. The other council members glanced at Edward, awaiting his decision. He'd listened closely, his face a blank veil. He remained silent for a prolonged, strained minute. The estimated expenses are considerable, he voiced at last, his tone impartial. The extended advantages, both to our image and the societies we function in, are boundless, Elena responded serenely. It's a tactical allocation. Edward Vanderbilt regarded his granddaughter. He saw not the escaped dreamer, nor the merciless leader he aimed to shape, but a blend of both. She had her mother's empathy and his tactical intellect. She bridged the two realms warring inside her. She wasn't just seizing her inheritance. She was reshaping it. A gradual grin emerged on his face. It was a grin of absolute, genuine admiration. The Vanderbilt Eagle Initiative, he tested the title. He addressed the council. It has my complete endorsement. We commence at once. Elena will direct it. It was the supreme affirmation. It surpassed any designation or workspace. He'd not only sanctioned her endeavor, he'd supported her outlook. In the ensuing months, Elena immersed herself in the initiative. It was an ideal merge of her talents. She was as at ease bargaining property agreements and building pacts as she was planning the design of a youth reading area. She journeyed nationwide, conferring with local guides, teachers, and residents. She was no longer solely a business leader in a lofty spire. She was in the field creating palpable change. She was finally merging her dual selves. The serene curator who trusted in the might of tales now possessed the assets of an international entity to deliver those tales to all. She was Elena Vanderbilt Thompson, and for the first time, the name felt complete. It felt hers. One afternoon, while inspecting the building location of the inaugural Eagle Center in a challenge sector of Queens, her device rang. It was an unfamiliar digit. She nearly dismissed it, but intuition prompted her to respond. Elena. The voice was tentative, fractured. She identified it instantly. It was Marcus. The sound propelled a shock through her, a ghost of a severed existence. But it wasn't pain or rage. It was a shock of separation. He sounded like a figure from an ancient tale, a role whose outcome no longer mattered to her. Marcus, she replied, her tone balanced. The din of building machinery echoed behind. I know all, he faltered. I'm profoundly sorry, Elena. I was an imbecile, a moron. I discarded the most remarkable element in my life because I was too sightless and foolish to perceive it. Please, may I just meet you? May I just converse with you? He was imploring, the hopelessness evident in his words. The authority balance had reversed utterly. He was the supplicant for her attention. Elena surveyed her surroundings. She saw the metal skeleton of a new edifice ascending from the earth, a venue soon teeming with texts, with aspiration, with possibility. She saw the tomorrow she was constructing. Then she considered Marcus, a man ensnared in the ruins of his own superficial drives. Her renewal was never about him. It was never about reprisal. It was about discovering herself, reclaiming her authority, and employing it to create something significant. His collapse was merely a consequence of his own decisions, a marginal note in her grander narrative. No, Marcus, she stated, and her tone was not harsh or vicious, but composed and decisive. There's not remaining to express. We have naught to discuss. She hesitated, then added one final element, not for him, but for her. I do hope you uncover what you seek. Farewell. She terminated the connection before he could answer. She returned the device to her pouch and refocused on the edifice, on the tomorrow. A breeze scattered particles across the location, and for an instant, she felt utterly, completely liberated. The specter of her history had been exorcised, not by vendetta, but by intent, and her true labor was just commencing. A year post the banquet, Elena stood on a platform before the first finished Vanderbilt Eagle Center. It was a striking contemporary structure of crystal and cozy timber, embedded in a society deprived of assets for years. The fall breeze was brisk, and the assembly ahead was a lively assortment of area households, municipal leaders, reporters, and the formal, dark-attired members of the Vanderbilt Council. Her grandfather occupied the front, appearing more delicate than a year prior, but his eyes, locked on her, were acute with admiration. In the past year, their connection had evolved from a strained guidance to a collaboration of shared esteem. He'd granted her independence, and she'd revitalized the benevolent core of his dominion, producing more favorable coverage and favor than he'd achieved in half a century. Elena, attired in a crisp yet approachable indigo dress, spoke sincerely. She discussed the strength of narratives, the value of society, and the core conviction that ability is widespread, but chance is not. Her voice was firm, infused with an authentic, infectious zeal. This wasn't Elena Vanderbilt Thompson, the business leader, addressing. This was Elena, the curator, who'd merely received a larger repository to construct. As she surveyed the children's faces in the crowd, their eyes broad with thrill, she felt a deep sense of correctness, a profound and lasting tranquility that no riches could purchase. This was authentic. This was her intent. She had converted the sorrow of her history, her kin's oppressive heritage, and Marcus's brutal dismissal into this, a haven of aspiration. After the event, as she exchanged grips and received accolades, a junior assistant from her workspace neared, an anxious expression on her face. "Miss Vanderbilt Thompson," she murmured, "there's an individual here demanding to speak with you. He claims it's personal." Elena trailed the assistant to a secluded spot behind the main platform, and there, positioned uneasily, appearing completely vanquished, was Marcus Hayes. He was a remnant of his former self. His costly outfit was wrinkled, his face thin, with shadows under his eyes. The haughty assurance had vanished, supplanted by a vacant, tormented appearance. He'd forfeited his position months earlier, a victim of his fixation and waning output. Rumors indicated he was monetarily devastated, his standing ruined. "Elena," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "I saw you in the reports. What you're achieving here, it's astounding. What do you desire, Marcus?" she inquired, her tone not harsh but fatigued. She harbored no fury for him. He was like an antique from a bygone existence, an item she no longer needed. "I wanted to express regret," he said, his eyes beseeching. "Not remotely, in person. I need you to know I perceive it now. I perceive you. I was so entangled in what I deemed triumph was, the funds, the rank, that I couldn't discern the true gem before me. You were all, and I discarded you for naught." He advanced hesitantly. "I'm not requesting another opportunity. I know I merit none. I had to inform you. You were the finest segment of my life, and my greatest sorrow will eternally be that I wasn't sufficient to recognize it." She attended, and for the first time, she trusted his sincerity. The urgency, the drive had been removed, leaving only the stark, agonizing reality of his defeat. She discerned the man he might have been, prior to his doubts and greed devouring him. A spark of former fondness, the recollection of the man she'd once cherished, stirred inside her. And in that instant, Elena confronted her ultimate trial. It wasn't about authority or funds or reprisal. It was about her heart's essence. Could she pardon him? What did renewal genuinely signify? She reflected on her path. She'd returned to the Vanderbilt sphere seeking authority, a means to affirm her value to the man who'd rejected her. But en route, she discovered something far more precious, her own intent. Her renewal was unrelated to him. "I trust you, Marcus," she said gently, "and I value the regret." A spark of aspiration ignited in his eyes. "Elena, but a regret doesn't obliterate the past," she proceeded kindly yet resolutely. "You didn't merely wound my heart. You shattered my faith. You demonstrated your affection was provisional, founded on a ledger I didn't even know existed, and that's not something I can revert to." She observed the final spark of aspiration extinguish in his eyes, replaced by a mournful, accepting resignation. He inclined slowly, comprehending. I have a fresh existence now. Marcus, she said, indicating toward the center. An existence I'm constructing on my terms. It's a fine existence, and I am content. It was truthful. The contentment was serene, firm, and wholly hers. It didn't rely on a man's endorsement or a kin's heritage. It was shaped by her deeds and the intent she'd uncovered. I wish you success, she added, a concluding gesture of mercy. I hope you discover a path to reconstruct, to uncover a different triumph. She pivoted and departed, leaving him there. She didn't glance back. There was no victory in his loss, only a serene grief for the man he'd failed to evolve into. Re-entering the festivity, she saw her grandfather observing her, a perceptive expression on his face. He'd witnessed Marcus arrive and permitted her to manage it, her final achievement. He elevated his vessel to her in a mute salute. Later that night, after the throngs dispersed, Elena stood solitary in the new repository. The scent of fresh texts and recent coding permeated the air. She traced her finger along a book's edge, the sleek surface under her touch. She was no longer the escapee, nor the rejected spouse. She was the designer of her own existence. She had confronted the shadows of her history, her kin's stifling heritage and her husband's crushing disloyalty, and emerged not fractured, but stronger, more integrated. She had uncovered the one element she'd abandoned fortune to seek a decade ago, a life truly hers, and it was more splendid than she'd ever envisioned. The Vanderbilt Eagle had finally discovered her flight. Elena's path teaches us that genuine authority isn't about the riches you possess, but the intent you uncover. She converted the profoundest disloyalty into her supreme fortitude, demonstrating that occasionally being misjudged is the ultimate edge. Her narrative is a potent memento that our value isn't shaped by others' opinions. If this tale of sorrow, endurance, and astonishing renewal touched you, please press that thumbs up to inform us. Remember to distribute it with someone who enjoys a story of victory over adversity. And for additional captivating narratives that will hold you captivated, ensure you join our channel and activate that alert icon. Thanks for viewing.